Chapter 101. Hearing this voice, Charlie frowned and looked up to look for recognition. He saw a young man wearing a white linen suit, black shoes, and all kinds of bracelets, walking towards this side. Although it was daylight, he wore a pair of antique gold-rimmed glasses with two round black glass plates, the kind of civilization mirror that the late Qing dynasty wore. The young man was followed by 4 or 5 bodyguards. Compared with his looks, these bodyguards were much more fierce and evil, and everyone next to him quickly moved away to avoid causing trouble. Yeah, it turned out to be Stephen. As soon as the boss saw the young man, he immediately opened his eyes and smiled, and the flattering words came out of his mouth like running water. "Mr. Stephen, why didn't you say anything in advance when you came here today? I'd have come to the street to welcome you." "Okay, don't talk nonsense, I will just take a look today." The young man waved his hand impatiently. He strode forward, took a look at the stone in Charlie's hand, and raised his head to ask the boss, "Irvin Jones, put this stone up for me. There is a paperweight stone on my dad's desk. It is just right to use it." The Mungbin boss gave a dry smile, looked at Charlie with a grimace, and said to please, "Mr. Stephen, this is really unfortunate. The stone has been bought by this brother. Actually, this stone is nothing special. Except for the press paper, it has no use for anything. I have specially reserved better products for you. What is the beauty of the worthless stones? Only the top quality products are worthy of your identity." Charlie knew that this boss was named Irvin Jones, and he seemed to know this young man. However, he was also amazed at Irvin Jones's lip service. He's really talkative to people and nonsense to ghosts. Irvin Jones quickly took out the hardened plastic jade horse, splashing in his mouth, "Mr. Stephen, this is the beloved object of the former imperial concubine. You see, this jade is crystal clear, and the jade is of good quality, so let's not talk too much. For the sake of Mr. Stephen, the price you bought the chicken tank cup is the same as yesterday. You can take it for 9,000. Jacob was speechless when he heard that. The same fake chicken tank cup, dare to buy 300 and still take advantage of it. He didn't expect that Stephen actually spent 9,000. Don't talk nonsense. Mr. Stephen was impatient at hearing, kicked Irvin Jones to the side, and said arrogantly, "I just like this stone, you give it to me, I will give you 20,000. When Irvin Jones heard 20,000, his heart suddenly became hot, and he turned his head and said to Charlie, "Brother, how about you give it to Stephen?" Charlie frowned and said coldly, "This is something I bought, and I don't want to transfer it to others." "Who asked you to transfer it? You haven't paid any money, whoever paid for it?" Mr. Stephen said impatiently, then took out a wallet from his arms, took a stack of banknotes, and threw them on Irvin Jones's face. "No need to look for 20,000, I'll take it." Irvin Jones's eyes lit up, and he quickly took the banknotes in his hand and smiled at Charlie. "Brother, I also have an inkstone paperweight from Emperor Kangxi. It is better to keep it than this." Charlie smiled and said, "Irvin Jones, you don't need to break those things, right? I bought this paperweight first, and I am not interested in giving it to others." Seeing Charlie didn't let go, Irvin Jones couldn't help it. After all, according to the rules of the antique transaction, it is to buy first, and if he breaks the rules, he will not be able to work in this antique street as soon as the news spreads. Irvin Jones had to turn around, nodded, and said to Mr. Stephen, "Mr. Stephen, this paperweight is really not a good thing, there is something better in my house." Before he could finish his words, Mr. Stephen kicked his waist and cursed, "You have been courageous? I have bought several things from you. Now you actually turn your elbow away to help a poor man talk?" Irvin Jones was kicked and sat on the ground, clutching his waist and grunting, complaining, "Mr. Stephen, if he doesn't give it to me, I can't help it." As he said, he winked Charlie vigorously, wanting him to let the stone out. Just by looking at Charlie's clothes and manners, he knew that he didn't have much money in his family, and he had no power or influence. Chapter 102. But Stephen is different. He is the famous second generation in the literary and entertainment world, and he hasn't felt a shortage of money since he was born. Irvin Jones didn't want to offend Stephen or break the rules, so he winked at Charlie. Charlie had seen Irvin Jones's hint a long time ago, but he ignored it and said faintly, "No." Irvin Jones was really helpless, so he could only sit on the ground and hum, so as not to be vented by Mr. Stephen again. "Look at you waste!" Mr. Stephen cursed with his eyebrows crossed and had to raise his head and glance at Charlie with a slanted eye. He said with money in his hands, "You bought it for 300. I will pay 30,000. Give it to me." The crowd onlookers made a sound of inhalation, and they all looked at Charlie, their eyes full of jealousy. The price of things bought for 300 increased by 100 times before the heat was covered. This is an obvious profit. Besides that pebble, anyone who knows the goods can see that it was picked up on the river beach. This kind of broken stone, there are many on the river beach. Where is the goddess paperweight? Jacob was also a little excited. After all, he made more than 2,000 when he changed hands. Not to mention making up for what he lost yesterday, he could still make a little profit. Charlie raised his head, smiled at Mr. Stephen, and said, "I say just now, don't sell. Even if you pay 300,000, I still have these words. You." Mr. Stephen's face suddenly became ugly, and a sharp light flashed in his eyes. There were crowds all around. Charlie flatly refused in public. Didn't this make him ashamed? "Turtle! You want to have trouble with me, right?" Stephen sneered fiercely. "Don't ask me, in this antique street, which one of the things that Stephen likes can't be bought? Today you have to sell, and if you don't, you still have to sell." After Stephen finished speaking, he waved his hand behind him. The bodyguard suddenly huddled and surrounded Charlie. The crowd around him also changed color. Even Jacob was stunned. The Cheen family in Oris Hill? That is a wealthy and distinguished family, even more prominent than Joel's family. No wonder Mr. Stephen spends 9,000 to buy a counterfeit chicken cup. He doesn't feel distressed at all. People don't care about money at all. If it is genuine or not, he just buys it for fun. Several bodyguards surrounded Charlie, aggressively. Jacob was afraid of things, so he winked at Charlie and asked him to quickly bring things to Mr. Stephen. Charlie looked faintly, glanced at the surrounding bodyguards, and said, "I'm still saying that, don't sell. If you want to take advantage of the situation, I can only tell you, my things, no one can take away. It won't work for you as well." "What's wrong with me?" Stephen looked arrogant and raised his chin to scold. "I tell you, I am the king of heaven. You, a turtle who wants to fight with me, are impatient." Chapter 103. Seeing Stephen's arrogance, the surrounding crowd held their breath, thinking, this Charlie dared to confront Stephen, this is a big loss. Charlie still had a calm face and smiled. "I think you are also in the antique industry. Have you ever thought about what is most particular about the antique industry?" Stephen asked coldly, "What is the most important thing?" Charlie laughed and said, "Of course the most peculiar thing is the rules." After that, raise the volume a bit and say loudly, "Antiques are first come, first served, and I'll be there. Who else will do business with you in this industry tomorrow?" When that happens, Mr. Stephen, you will become a rat crossing the street, and everyone will scream. As soon as he finished speaking, Stephen was stunned. A flash of anger flashed across his face. There is indeed such a rule in the antique world. He claims to play elegant scholar, and he is naturally very clear about this rule. If today's incident spreads, the store he usually deals with will probably retreat for fear of offending other customers. Stephen didn't expect that Charlie would stop himself from coming to the stage with a few words. He stared at Charlie fiercely, really wanting to kick that face. But he still swallowed his anger forcibly, gritted his teeth, and said, "Do you really think that you are worthy of your rock? I just want you to know that antiques are not accessible to everyone. You are a poor ghost, you should go home as soon as possible to plant the land, so as not to tarnish it." After speaking, Stephen rolled up his sleeves with a dark face, and raised his arms to Charlie's eyes, and shook, "Open your dog's eyes and see clearly. This string of chicken blood jade is 150 from Lingnan. I got it. Have you seen such a good thing?" The bracelet on Stephen's wrist was crystal clear, red, and shiny in the sun, and it was so beautiful that everyone around him opened his eyes. Irvin Jones stared at the hand strings, swallowing fiercely. "I'm shocked, what a good thing." "Humph. Of course." Stephen was very proud of everyone's reaction. After that, he glanced at Charlie contemptuously, opened his collar, and pulled out a good-shaped jade piece tied around his neck. "Look at this again. This piece of chalcedony is a coming-of-age ceremony gift given to me by the Emperor of the Sui dynasty. 88 high-ranking monks set up an altar to consecrate the Buddha and recite the Buddha for 108 days. It is worth 3 million. Upon hearing that this piece of good chalcedony was so big, the crowd craned their necks to watch. Irvin Jones flapped his nose with excitement as if being slapped. His eyes were straight at the jade good, his eyes were greedy, and he wanted to swallow it into his stomach. Stephen held the jade good and sneered at Charlie. "Poor playing watch, rich playing jade, you are a poor man, you can't afford decent clothes, and you want to buy antiques. It makes people laugh out loud." His tone was ironic, and the surrounding crowd looked at Charlie from time to time. Indeed, Charlie didn't look like a wealthy family. He wore the most common white t-shirt, jeans, and a pair of sneakers, just like a young working man. As for Stephen's outfit, it seems ordinary, but anyone who knows how to do it knows that this set of clothes is expensive and completely handmade, and it costs at least 6 figures from head to toe. Charlie looked at Stephen with a smug look and felt that this man was King funny, but in fact, he was not a wicked person. At best he was a silly young master who was short-sighted. So Charlie looked at him and asked with a smile, "You are rich, aren't you? Look at your bracelet, it looks really good, but it's a fake." Stephen was taken aback for a moment, and suddenly roared, "You are talking nonsense, my bracelet can't be fake. If you don't believe me, ask the bosses in the antique shops around you." Charlie shrugged and said something in the words, "If you have money to play antiques, you also have to look at who is playing antiques. If a blind person has to get in the antique circle, he doesn't know how to pretend to understand, in the eyes of others. He is just a fat sheep, nothing more." Stephen was full of irritation. Hearing that Charlie was mocking his ignorance, he sternly said, "If my bracelet is genuine, you can kneel down and admit it to me on the spot. How about it?" 104. Chapter 104. "Okay." Charlie agreed, with an extremely relaxed attitude, thinking of artificial bloodstone as chicken blood jade. "I can only say that you are really a talent." Stephen was ridiculed by him, his face flushed, he turned his head fiercely and said to the crowd watching the whole scene, "Boss Jones and Boss Lee, you two will appraise me to see if this bracelet is true or not." The two people named by him suddenly showed embarrassment and looked at each other. Appraisal of antiques, whether they are true or false, is offensive, and it might offend colleagues. "Stephen, we both have limited knowledge, we really can't see it." Stephen said angrily, "Don't think I don't know what yours is. You give me a good appraisal, no matter whether it is genuine or not, you will not trouble me. But if you fool around, I will find someone to appraise it afterward. I can't spare you for telling lies." "Don't be angry, Mr. Stephen." The two came forward in shock. No one dared to offend Mr. Stephen when doing business in Antique Street. Therefore, the two antique shop owners had to bite the bullet and take a look at the jade string. A few minutes later, one of the bosses gave a shuddering dry smile. "Stephen, that little brother is right, your bracelets." "Say." Stephen sneered coldly. The boss was frightened and said quickly, "Your bracelet is indeed artificial bloodstone, not jade." As soon as his voice fell, Stephen's face turned green, bloodshot, and flushed quickly, as if being slapped in public. His throat swallowed fiercely as if to be angry. The two bosses were so frightened that they drew back into the crowd, not daring to appear again. Charlie smiled and said, "Do you believe it now? Buying a bunch of artificial stones for 1.5 million, Mr. Stephen is indeed rich." "This time I missed you." Stephen gritted his teeth and said, "Isn't it just 1.5 million? Do you think I will pay the money? Even if my bracelets are fake, my jade good is always real, absolutely genuine. For this jade good, Stephen is 100% confident." Because he did find an expert to appraise it, this good is indeed a good ancient jade, and it is in the Sui dynasty. Charlie snorted coldly. If you can wear such a big evil thing as a treasure, I'm afraid there will be no second fool like you in the world. What are you talking about? It's just silly. Stephen roared sharply, and the blue veins on his forehead protruded. Charlie said faintly, you have collected such a fierce thing next to your skin. You are lucky if you haven't died yet. Stephen's face was ugly, but with the lessons learned just now, he was not sure whether Charlie's words were true or false. He stared and asked, why do you say that? Look at the shape of this jade good. Charlie said coldly, did you not check when you received the jade? What exactly do jade pieces of this shape do? Stephen yelled with some confidence, this isn't this Sui Emperor's coming-of-age ceremony. The good represents auspiciousness, and everyone who deals in jade knows this. I know this better than you, poor guy. You know what a T. Chapter 105. Seeing Stephen's hard mouth, Charlie shook his head and sneered disdainfully, you don't even know the difference between a good and a jade plug. The old saying goes, jinn and jade are in the 9 orifices, and the dead are immortal. You should always know the sentence. What kind of golden jade, dead people? Stephen was confused. Charlie's face was you can't teach a child, and he shook his head and said, I don't know this. Have you always heard of Jukiayu? What 9-aperture jade? Stephen was even more confused, looking at Charlie blankly. Although Stephen likes antiques, he doesn't have the mind to study at all, that is, he buys what others say is good, and then goes out and pretends to be right. Idiot! Charlie sneered, 9-aperture jade is the jade plug used by the dead to plug the 9 apertures. There are 7 orifices in the ears, nose, mouth, and eyes, plus the genital pores and excretory holes. Dead! Stephen opened his mouth wide, his eyes rounded. He glanced at the jade hanging around his neck in disbelief, and the hair on his back suddenly stood up. Is this from a dead person? Charlie said mockingly, it seems that you really don't understand. This in your hand is used by a dead person to plug the drain hole, which is the cylinder door. You even wear it on your neck, don't you feel smelly? Stephen couldn't speak anymore, staring at the jade good in his hand. Suddenly a strong feeling of nausea surged. This jade good was actually stuffed in that place. And I actually took it as a mascot and hung it around my neck for 3 years. The most D***MN thing is that because I like this thing so much, I often play with it in my mouth. Doesn't this mean that I indirectly ate the ancient's filth? Vomit! Stephen couldn't help it anymore, bending down and retching. The crowd who were still scrambling to watch, now cast a mocking look at him. Some even gloated at the misfortune, mocking Stephen for being blind, and spending a lot of money to buy such a bad thing. Charlie said coldly, also, this jade piece has been soaked in corpse chi for a long time, and it has sucked enough fierce aura. If you continue to wear it, you will surely die within a year. As soon as he finished his words, the crowd around Stephen immediately held back, for fear of being contaminated by the ferocity on his body. Irvin Jones, who was standing beside Stephen, also ran to the very edge. Although he is a half-bucket of water, and he usually does nothing but deceives, but he has also dealt with the thief-fighting master, knowing that Charlie's words are not groundless. Stephen was also frightened and looked up at Charlie in a daze. Charlie's face was cold, and he snorted, are you going to have a bad time this year? Have you had a bloody disaster like a car accident or something? Stephen stared at Charlie blankly, completely stunned. He did have a bad fortune this year, and he had just had a car accident at the beginning of the year. If it hadn't been for the crash-resistant Hummer that day, he would have given his life a long time ago. However, the driver who drove was killed on the spot. He broke 2 ribs and spent half a month in the hospital before returning home. Stephen burst into a cold sweat, pulled the jade piece off his neck, waved, and threw it far away. The crowd backed away quickly, for fear of causing trouble to the upper body. Seeing Stephen's guilty conscience, Charlie sneered in his heart. If he hadn't reminded him today, if Stephen continued to wear it, he would definitely die this year. Who are you? Stephen gritted his teeth and glared at Charlie. This person knows too much. Is it someone sent by the enemy? I am someone you can't afford.